Hey everyone, welcome back to I Dare You Sleep. I know a lot of you love to fall asleep to these creepy stories, but before you do, leave a comment and let me know where you're listening from around the world. And if you're enjoying the thrills, don't forget to like, subscribe, and see if you can make it through without losing any sleep.
It was a cold, stormy weekend in late October when the Halloween of 1985 fell on a Saturday. My mother, obsessed with outdoing the neighbors, had transformed our secluded home at the edge of the small town of Ashbury into a Halloween spectacle. Decorations covered every inch of the house, from the front yard to the shadowy sides where the forest crept close to our property. Despite her best efforts, the trick-or-treaters were scarce. The sky had been a heavy gray all day, and a storm loomed in the distance. My mother refused to accept that the impending storm might have been scaring people off. Instead, she thought we hadn't put up enough decorations. She insisted that I go up into the attic to retrieve whatever Halloween props we had left. Reluctantly, I climbed the creaky attic stairs, the space directly above my bedroom. The attic always gave me a sense of unease, with its dim light and dusty corners filled with forgotten relics. I found the last of the Halloween bins and began dragging one towards the attic door when I heard a sharp crack, the sound of wood snapping. I froze. The sound came from the far corner of the attic, where shadows clung to piles of boxes. I brushed it off as nothing unusual. Old attics make noises, right? I brought the bin downstairs, and my mother and I continued decorating. The wind picked up, and the sky darkened further, as if the storm was preparing to unleash itself. As the day wore on, only a few brave trick-or-treaters ventured to our door, much to my mother's dismay. She had made elaborate candy bags, but most remained untouched. By nightfall, the rain started pouring, driving away any hope of more visitors. I retreated to my room to escape the disappointment and play video games on my laptop. The house was eerily quiet, save for the occasional rumble of thunder. Then from above, I heard it again, the sound of something moving in the attic. At first, I tried to ignore it, but this time, the noise was more distinct, like deliberate footsteps. My skin prickled. I paused my game and listened. The sound stopped. I told myself it was just the wind, but when I stepped into the hallway, I saw something that made my heart drop. The attic door was slightly ajar. Panic surged through me. I stood there, frozen, listening to faint noises coming from downstairs. The soft clinking of glass, the sound of the refrigerator opening. Someone was in the house. My parents were both asleep, their door closed tight. I crept over to their room, my heart pounding, and gently shook my dad awake. "Dad," I whispered, "there's someone in the kitchen." His eyes snapped open. He reached under his bed, grabbing a police baton he kept for emergencies. My dad wasn't a fighter, but his face was tense with fear. He slowly crept out into the hallway, and after a few moments, he returned, his face pale. "Someone's climbing back into the attic," he whispered. We locked ourselves in the bedroom, my dad quickly dialing 911. The minutes dragged by in agonizing silence as we listened to the rain batter the windows, the faint sounds from the attic just above our heads. My mom, now awake, was trembling, her eyes wide with terror. The police arrived not long after, and we could hear them calling out as they entered the house. They made their way up into the attic. The sound of footsteps and muffled voices reached us through the ceiling. Then, the police emerged with a man, disheveled, dirty, with wild eyes and matted hair. He had been living up there, in the attic above my room, for who knows how long. The jar of peanut butter they found, along with one of our blankets, was proof of how he'd been surviving. He confessed to walking in through the front door the day before, when my mom had been busy with the decorations, leaving it open for just a few minutes. He had no place to go, and our attic had seemed like the perfect hiding spot. The idea that he had been lurking above us, watching us, listening, while we went about our daily lives was horrifying. The police took him away, but the thought of those moments where I had heard him, just feet above me, kept me awake for nights to come. What if we had confronted him instead of the police? What if things had gone differently? The shadows of that Halloween still linger, darker than any decoration we could have put up. It was Halloween night in 1997, and I had just turned 18. My parents were out of town for the weekend, so I decided to host a small house party at our family home in the quiet, fog-covered town of Blackwater Creek. The house, an old Victorian-style home perched at the edge of the forest, had always felt a little too isolated for my liking, but it was perfect for a Halloween bash. I invited around 40 people, close friends mostly. and made sure to remind everyone not to bring strangers. Strict orders from my parents. They had also left me with another rule. The house had to be cleaner than before once the party ended. It all seemed like a simple plan. What could possibly go wrong? By 6 o'clock p.m., as the sky darkened and the wind picked up, the first guests started arriving. We had the party spread between the backyard and the dimly lit first floor. A few people helped me decorate the living room with eerie pumpkins and fake cobwebs, while others set up in the backyard, where the sound of leaves rustling in the wind added to the Halloween atmosphere. My friend Ben brought his DJ equipment, and the party was soon in full swing. As the night deepened, everyone was having a good time. The bass from the music thudded through the floor, and I could hear bursts of laughter from outside. Around 10 o'clock p.m., I was making rounds, talking to people, when one of my friends came up to me, looking puzzled. "Hey, who's the guy in the skeleton bodysuit?" he asked. I blinked. "Skeleton bodysuit? I don't remember seeing anyone like that." "He was snooping around the house," my friend continued, a note of concern creeping into his voice. "Seemed off." I frowned and headed inside, asking around if anyone knew the guy. No one did. Unease began to settle in my stomach. Then I spotted him, a tall figure in a black and white skeleton suit, walking down the staircase. His movements were slow, deliberate. He was broader than most of the other guests, not muscular, but with a heavy, stocky build. "Hey," I called out, approaching him. "Who are you?" He stopped and turned toward me. His mask covered his entire face, and his eyes were hidden in shadow. "Name's Mike," he said in a low, gravelly voice. "Was just using the bathroom." There was something about him that sent a chill down my spine. He sounded too old to be at a party like this, too out of place. "Who invited you?" I asked, trying to stay calm. "Tom," he replied. "I didn't know anyone named Tom." "Who's Tom?" I pressed. He didn't answer. Instead, he turned and walked straight past me, heading for the front door. I stood there, heart racing, unsure of what to do. I didn't follow him, but I made a quick decision to run upstairs and check if anything had been stolen. All the doors were closed, except for the bathroom. Nothing seemed out of place. I locked the front door and returned to the party, telling my friends about the strange man. No one knew who he was, and the incident slowly faded into the background as the party continued. By midnight, most people had left, and the house grew eerily quiet. Only a few close friends, including my buddy Vinny, stayed behind to help clean up. After everyone else had left, I started getting ready for bed. Vinny crashed on the couch downstairs, and my little sister Sarah, who was only 14, had been asleep for hours in her room. The house felt unsettlingly quiet as I brushed my teeth. Deciding to hang out with Vinny a little longer, I went downstairs and found him watching YouTube videos on the TV. We laughed quietly, not wanting to wake Sarah. But then, we both heard something that made us freeze. The sound of footsteps from upstairs. I frowned. "It's probably Sarah," I muttered. But something felt off. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, and they didn't move toward the bathroom or her room. Instead, they stopped. I stood up, heart pounding, and headed upstairs to check on my sister. I knocked softly on her door. No answer. I opened it and found her sound asleep, undisturbed. Panic surged through me as I turned toward my parents' bedroom. Their door was ajar, even though I had made sure it was shut earlier. Slowly, I pushed it open. The room was dark, but as I backed away, a figure caught my eye. Standing there, just inside the room, was the man in the skeleton suit. My blood turned to ice. He hadn't left. He'd been hiding in the house the entire time. I backed out, my mind racing, pretending I hadn't seen him. I quietly pulled the door shut and hurried downstairs. "Vinny," I whispered urgently. "He's still here." Vinny's face went pale. He grabbed his phone and called 911 while I tiptoed back upstairs, heart hammering in my chest. I quietly woke Sarah, explaining the situation and making sure she stayed calm. Together we crept downstairs, where Vinny was waiting by the back door. We slipped outside into the cold night and hurried to the neighbor's house, pounding on the door until they let us in. We waited in tense silence until the police arrived, but by the time they searched the house, the man was gone. The window in my parents' bedroom was wide open, curtains billowing in the cold night air. Worse still, their closet was ajar, the one where my dad kept his safe. It looked like someone had tried to break into it. The skeleton man had known. He'd known about the safe, known we were having a party, and had used the chaos as his cover to sneak inside. Who he was, or how he knew, we never found out. But after that night, I could never shake the feeling that he had been watching us, waiting, and that was the last time I was ever allowed to throw a party in that house. In the small, fog-drenched town of Ravenwood in 2016, Halloween had always been a time of both excitement and dread. That year, it would be my last time trick-or-treating, as I was turning 15. I wanted it to be something special, a big farewell to childhood. My mom, always laid back, let me plan a multi-day event, sleepovers with my friends Davis and Zach the night before Halloween, skipping school the next day to trick-or-treat, and then a private sleepover with just me and my girlfriend Amber. It all started the night before Halloween. Our basement had recently been renovated into a man cave, perfect for a horror marathon. The basement itself had always given me the creeps, especially the long, narrow hallway that led into the man cave. The light switch never worked, and the darkness there seemed to have a life of its own. But for tonight, it added to the eerie vibe we were chasing. We gathered around the TV, armed with snacks and horror films. My mom made us cookies, and after finishing Scream, we moved on to Paranormal Activity. The movie had barely started when the motion-sensing light in the backyard suddenly flicked on, flooding the room with cold, artificial light. It shattered the creepy mood. I waited for the light to shut off, and when it finally did, I hit play again. But not even a minute later, the light turned on again. Davis asked what was causing it, and I shrugged, pretending I wasn't starting to feel uneasy. The light turned off again, and I pressed play once more. But when it happened a third time, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I had to check what was going on. "Let's go look," I said, trying to sound casual. Davis and Zach followed me upstairs to the back door. By the time we got there, the backyard was pitch black again, the light having shut off. We stood by the glass door, staring into the thick darkness, but nothing stirred. I tried to shake it off and returned to the basement. We decided to turn off the movie and just sit around, chatting about random things, but a nagging sense of unease lingered. Around 2 a.m., everyone had fallen asleep except for me. I was scrolling through my phone when the light came on again. This was the fourth time now, and I could feel my heart pounding. Exhausted, I dragged myself upstairs and looked out the back door. Nothing, just the dark yard, trees swaying in the breeze. I convinced myself it was just a neighborhood prank, kids messing with us, and went back to the basement to sleep. The next day, Halloween arrived. I went trick-or-treating with Davis, Zach, and Amber. We hit most of the houses in the area, filling our bags with candy. But all night, I couldn't shake the weirdness from the night before. I hadn't mentioned it to Amber. She was easily scared, and I didn't want to ruin the night for her. We were nearing the end of our route when Amber let out a sudden yelp of pain. I spun around to see her holding her arm, and behind her, about 15 feet away, was a man in a clown mask. My heart froze. This was during the height of the creepy clown sightings that had been sweeping the country. But what unsettled me the most was how he was dressed. Just a regular guy with a plain hoodie and jeans, but that mask. "Get lost!" I shouted, trying to sound tough. The clown just stood there, staring at us, his face hidden behind the grotesque grin of the mask. He didn't move. We kept walking, hurrying our steps, but my skin crawled as I felt his eyes following us. We decided to call it a night, skipping the last few houses and heading back to my place. That night, Amber stayed over. We were sitting in the basement again, picking up where we left off with Paranormal Activity. The scene was tense. A character was wandering through the house, searching for something in the dark, when suddenly, the screen went black. At the same time, the dim lights in the man cave flickered off. Amber and I looked at each other. The power had gone out. My heart started racing. The house had never lost power unless there was a storm. But when I checked the weather, it was clear and calm. No storm. Something felt horribly wrong. "I'm coming with you," Amber said, voice shaky as I prepared to check the fuse box. The generator was outside, in the backyard, the same yard where the motion light had gone off repeatedly the night before. My stomach churned as we slid open the glass door. Everything was still, eerily silent except for the distant chirping of crickets. We walked toward the generator, passing the motion light, but it didn't flicker on this time. A cold wave of dread washed over me. As we got closer to the generator, I heard it. A twig snapping from somewhere in the trees at the far end of the yard. Amber and I froze, staring into the forest, but we saw nothing. The feeling of being watched pressed down on me like a weight. "I think we should go back inside," I whispered, already retreating. Amber was right behind me, and just as we reached the door, I saw him. Standing by the shed, half hidden in the shadows, was the man in the clown mask. He hadn't moved from where he was the night before, still wearing the same dirty hoodie and jeans. Our eyes met, and then, without warning, he lunged forward, sprinting straight toward us. Amber screamed. I yanked the door open and slammed it shut behind us just as the man reached the steps. We raced downstairs to the man cave, my heart hammering in my chest. That's when I realized in my panic, I had forgotten to lock the door. A sudden slam from upstairs echoed through the house. He was inside. Amber was shaking, too terrified to speak. So I grabbed her phone and dialed 911, whispering to the operator that there was someone in the house. The minutes stretched on like hours, and then, from the hallway just outside the man cave, I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, heavy footsteps. Descending the stairs. Amber's breathing was too loud. I had to cover her mouth, afraid he would hear us. The footsteps came closer, stopping just outside the door. My pulse thundered in my ears. I grabbed an empty beer bottle from the bar, ready to use it if I had to. I could feel my whole body trembling as the doorknob began to turn. Then, in the distance, the sound of sirens pierced the silence. The footsteps retreated, and I heard the back door slam. I rushed upstairs as the police arrived, but it was too late. The man had escaped into the night, disappearing into the darkness behind the house. The only trace of him was the open window in the back and the lingering sense of dread that clung to the air. To this day, the image of that clown mask staring down at me as I lay on the floor, helpless, haunts me, and I haven't been able to step into that man cave without the weight of that night pressing down on me, a constant reminder of the evil that lurked just outside our door.